Today's soul session.
Yes, today's soul session is, I'm just going to make sure that we are live. Yes, on Facebook. Hi, and welcome to Wednesday's soul session. Today we are going to talk about trauma and what happens when trauma hits us, and how trauma affects us, how we can get through when it happens, and how we get through processing it as well.
Yeah. We have a lot to share.
We have a lot to share, so we'll see how much we'll talk. But I think to begin with, it's very important to realize that how we define trauma and can be very different between people.
Yeah.
And we can both experience the same thing, and one of us can experience it as trauma and the other one not. So it's very important for us to realize that and not to
discount, I think, what we feel.
Yes, exactly. I was looking for that word.
Because we've seen, like, with siblings that grow up with violence in the home, that they experience things very differently.
Yeah.
And they can have completely different memories from their childhood.
Yes.
And this impacts them differently as grown-ups, depending on how they experience what happened. But that is something that impacts people their whole life in one way or another, because it impacts every part of our lives.
Yeah.
And just seeing these differences between siblings, that tells us that exactly this, what you said, is true, that we experience trauma differently. And we need to realize this and allow ourselves to, experience all these emotions that come up, because the emotions are normal. They're a normal part of,
And especially, I think, with our generation and the generations that came before us, when trauma happened, when something traumatic happened, people really didn't talk about it. It was just a thing that happened, and it wasn't discussed afterwards. So I had all kinds of trauma in my youth, and so did you.
Yeah.
And because it was never talked about, it sat with us, and we brought it with us to our adult years. And these traumatic events have been shaping how we react to life as adults.
And shaping a lot about how we live our life, not just how we react, but how we live, like what we choose to study, what we choose to work, how we choose our partners, and friends, how we bring up our children.
Yeah.
So this is something that is interesting to look at, and it has been a part of our journey to really dig into where we come from and where we are going.
Yes.
And, if we look into where we are coming from, then it somehow, for me, becomes easier to accept things and to accept myself as I am. And
you understand yourself better.
That's true.
Yeah.
And also, it is easier often to forgive myself for the things, for the way I was thinking, especially about myself.
Yes.
And for all my reactions and my choices.
Yeah.
Because this is all based on what I experienced as a child and as a teenager and so on. And then I need to, go through all of this, kind of bring myself up again and work through all this stuff. But it does take time.
It takes a lot of time, which is okay. It's time well spent, I think.
Very well spent.
Yeah. But when trauma hits, of course, especially, I think we remember maybe better what is closer to us in time. But I remember how trauma felt when I was a young kid as well. And when you get this, when it happens, you have this feeling of everything going into slow motion. And you have this sense of things not being real. I don't know how to explain it exactly, which is just the shock. The shock is coming to your body. And the only thing you can think about is just what to do next to survive. And that is pretty much what happens in every trauma that we have. But trauma can be so different. We can have trauma. For example, I had a very bad accident, car accident, and that was trauma that happened very fast. And then we can have trauma. For example, my mother, she was diagnosed with brain cancer, and she was sick for 3 years before she passed away. So her diagnosis was, of course, a big trauma for the family. But then we had to live in that trauma for 3 years because she was very sick, and she changed a lot. Her personality changed. She wasn't able to speak much, and she needed a lot of care. So we were grieving a person that was beside us, but she was not there. And we were living in that trauma for 3 years. So trauma can both be something that happens really fast and then you can process it, but it can also be a prolonged situation where you are forced, because you can't step out of a situation like that when it comes to your loved ones, that you just have to survive.
And we cannot require ourselves to process everything while it's happening. We need to give it proper time. And it is good to know with grief, for example, the process that we go through with grief, because that is something that takes time and we go through different stages. And for me, when I lost my uncle, he was young. We were very connected to him, and it was so good to sit down with a priest. They know the grief process very well, and just go through the steps. He was still with us, but we knew what was happening. And just to accept that all these emotions were normal, that all the emotions were something that everybody goes through. And that it takes time, and we could monitor the steps, and we could feel, okay, I'm here now. And in the end, I will get through, even though it will always be with us, like with your mother.
And trauma can, of course, trauma that happens when we are very young can stay with us and affect us for the rest of our lives. And for example, I had a very distant father, or a father that wasn't really in my life. I knew of him, but I didn't know him. And for a little girl that just wanted to have a dad, it was really, really difficult. And then I can see how that reflects, or when I reflect on my life, especially as a young woman, I understand how that affected me through my life, because I was always trying to prove to people that I was worth being loved. And I I did a lot of things to do that. I spent a lot of energy doing that. And I feel that this tendency is still in me, that if I feel that there's a person that I care for, or that I would like to be more connected to, if I feel that they are not on the same page, then I feel this urge inside me that I want to convince them that I'm worth of being loved. So this is just one example of, even though I've worked a lot through my trauma and how this has affected me through my life, this has taught me that our trauma doesn't really go away.
The triggers are there.
The triggers are there, but what we do by working through our trauma is that we understand the triggers, and it takes us maybe a shorter time to unwind again, and maybe not react so quickly to the triggers. So instead of trying to convince people now, I take maybe a day where I'm very sad, that I'm not worth, that to them I am not worthy of being loved, or being I don't have their time. But then I just take a step back and just, okay, that's the way it is. I can't change it. So I'll spend my energy on people that want to be around me.
And I think that's completely normal, because we go through layer after layer of things we need to work through. And that's something that we need to accept, that it takes time. There are many layers. You don't work through things just once. Things will revisit us again and again. And that it is normal. And sometimes, as we become more and more conscious about our reactions, then we sometimes realize, okay, I need to work a little bit more on this. especially if it happens repeatedly, emotions are coming up and so on, then I need to go through this again. I need to go through the next layer. And I think it's also important that we discuss things. And I think we approach things very differently than we did when we were younger. We are much more aware of what's happening to us. And obviously, because we've known each other for such a long time, then I did not realize always how I reacted to the things that I, experienced when I was a child, and same with you as, not having a father. But my daughter goes through the same, and as a teenager, it's difficult not to have a father. She's experiencing the same things, but I can both have learned from your experience, and she is much more aware of the impact on her because we can discuss things. And that's the thing that happened, that was in our childhood. Things were not discussed.
Yeah.
And when we can never talk about things, when we are not really aware of our feelings, and that's what I think is so great with a lot of young people today. They are so much more aware of their feelings and so much more open to discussing things than we were when we were younger.
Yeah. And often, especially around individuals that have not worked a lot or started working on themselves, because when we experience trauma, we often need just somebody to be around us. We don't necessarily need somebody to save us or do anything. Sometimes it's just nice to have a person sitting next to you in silence, just to know that somebody is there for you. But we as adults, we are, especially I would say our generation and the older generations, we don't know exactly how to react if something traumatic happens to people around us.
Yeah.
So our instinct is off to think to ourselves, well, I don't want to bother them. But that just means I am too scared or too insecure to risk reaching out to them. And I experienced that a lot through my mom's illness, that people that I thought would be there weren't. They just disappeared. And I really saw what people I could count on. And sometimes it was people that I had no idea had so much affection for my family. And I think that's something that quickly becomes apparent when we are going through difficult things. And our first reaction, for example, with my mom's illness, in the family, there's always somebody that in the trauma that takes control and tries to embrace everyone. And in our case, it was me. And I was coordinating, the doctor's appointments and trying to keep everyone, trying to take care of everyone else. And it was good for me to have a part to play, I think, to find purpose in that, but it could also be very draining.
And we cannot forget that often the people who appear the strongest, they also need our help and support.
Yeah.
That is really important.
And after experiencing this through my mom's illness, I take every time something traumatic happens to someone that I care for, I reach out. And because I know that it's not about what I can do for that person. I don't have to save anything or take care of anything. I can't take their trauma away. I can't take their sorrow away. But I can tell them, I am here if you need me. Even if it's just that you need to know that somebody is close to you. I can sit outside your door. You don't have to talk to me, or we can sit in silence. It doesn't matter. Just I want you to know that I'm here. And that's sometimes the only thing people need, is just they need to know that somebody is there, because nobody can fix what is going on.
No, and it is not our role to take anything away from people, because we're all learning, and it's the same goes for our children and young people.
Yeah.
We all need to experience these things, but we can hold space, and it's important that we offer people to hold space. And as you say, sometimes you sit together in silence. And for us going through the trauma, we also need to remember to ask for help and ask for what we need, what we really need, and take really good care of us and make sure that we go through the emotions as they come up, because it is not good to try to push everything down.
And it's also just when you're going through the trauma, it's very important that you are not pressing yourself to recover too quickly. I mean, you just let yourself go through the motions, because it takes time. And I've had a lot of all kinds of trauma through my life. And what I've learned from it is a lot of things, of course. But what I've learned is that things will get better in the end, but I need to allow it to happen. I can't press it. I can't pretend that I feel something else than I do, and I need to give myself permission. If somebody comes to me and say, "How are you?" And I'm allowed to say, "I'm not well. I'm very sad. And this is not a good day." Even if it makes the person uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Person asked me, and I'm going to be honest.
Yeah.
So we need to allow ourselves just to acknowledge how we feel.
We cannot control this process.
No.
And we also need to be prepared, if we ask the question, how are you?
Yeah.
That someone responds in a different way than I'm fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is a lot, but
there's a lot to talk about trauma. We could do a lot of sessions about trauma, but
we encourage everyone to also have this neutral party, outside of our closest circle of friends and family, to be able to seek advice, whether it's a healer, it's any kind of therapist, priests or other, religious leaders, because they often have a lot of experience and knowledge about the processes we're going through, or the trauma and the grieving. And also ask for help for yourself, whether it's from the light beings or from people.
And if you are in a situation where you are maybe following a loved one through prolonged illness, don't leave. Don't say, "I will work on this," or "I will get help after this is all done." In my instance, it took 3 years for my mom to pass away, from her illness. And if I hadn't sought help just to help me process, I won't, because I went to advisor or a psychologist, few people, and I went to healing sessions just to help me get through it. And then after mom passed away, a few months after that, or maybe a year or two, then I can start processing everything that happens. But I didn't put the demand on myself to start processing anything while I was still in the situation. And I don't think we should do that. The only thing we need to do is just, what do I need to get through this?
Yeah.
How can I get through this and still stay alive, stay sane, and be able to be here for myself, and maybe if I have children or family that I need to be here for.
We need to take care of ourselves.
Definitely. So we hope that this has given you some light bulb moments or helped you in some way. But if you have any questions or comments about trauma, or how you have dealt with, sorry, I lost my words there, then please write it in the comments section below. And if you're watching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe. So we'll be here in a week with a different subject. Until then, take care.
Thank you.